This morning started like any other, but by lunchtime, my entire world had been turned upside down. My name is Mary Ann. I'm 72 years old, a widow, and until a few hours ago, I lived with my son, Greg, and his daughter, Kyle, in a suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I moved in with them about 6 months ago after I had knee surgery and needed a place to recover. I thought it would be a temporary thing, just until I was back on my feet. But then 1 month turned into 2, and 2 into 6, and suddenly I was just there. The smell of instant oatmeal usually makes my stomach turn, but this morning, it was just the backdrop to what happened. Kyle, my grandson, a lanky 17-year-old who usually only grunts in my direction, was surprisingly chatty. He was going on and on about some new crypto project he'd found online. I wasn't really listening, just nodding and sipping my weak tea, hoping he'd finish his breakfast so I could clear the table. Then he hit me with it. "Grandma, I need about $5,000. I almost choked on my tea. $5,000 for a crypto project? I'd spent my life as a librarian in a small town, pinching pennies and saving what little I could. $5,000 was a fortune to me. I put my mug down carefully. "Kyle, I don't have that kind of money just sitting around for investments. And even if I did, I wouldn't put it into something I don't understand, especially not a digital currency that sounds like a gamble." Kyle's face fell, and I saw Greg, my son, stiffen beside him. Greg hadn't said much this morning, just scrolled on his phone while he ate. Now he looked up, a storm brewing in his eyes. He opened his mouth, probably to argue, but then he just didn't. Instead, he reached across the table for the milk carton, and as he did, his elbow seemed to snag the edge of Kyle's steaming bowl of oatmeal. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a deliberate, sweeping motion. The bowl flew, the hot, gooey oats arcing through the air like a slow-motion nightmare before splashing directly into my lap. A gasp escaped me, a sharp, choked sound. The heat was immediate, searing through my thin pajama bottoms. I cried out, more in shock than pain at first, jumping up from the table. The bowl clattered to the floor, bits of oatmeal splattering across the linoleum. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry," Greg exclaimed, but his voice lacked any real remorse. He didn't move to help me, didn't even offer a napkin. He just sat there, watching me as I scrambled to pull my pajamas away from my skin. My legs were already turning red, a painful blush blooming on my thighs. Then Sarah, Greg's wife, appeared from the living room, drawn by the commotion. She took one look at me, then at the mess, and a weary sigh escaped her. "Mary Ann, honestly," she began, her voice dripping with annoyance, "if you're not going to contribute, then maybe you should consider other arrangements. This isn't a retirement hostel, you know." The words hit me harder than the hot oatmeal. Not a retirement hostel. So that was it, wasn't it? My purpose here was purely transactional. My heart ached, a deep, hollow throb. The humiliation was overwhelming, a burning shame that dwarfed the sting on my skin. They didn't want me. They wanted my money. My voice was a mere whisper, thick with unshed tears. "Don't worry about other arrangements," I said, looking from Sarah to Greg, who still hadn't moved. "I'll be gone by nightfall." I didn't wait for a response. I just turned and walked away, each step a testament to the quiet fury building inside me. The oatmeal still clung to my skin, hot and sticky, a physical reminder of their betrayal. My own son, my flesh and blood, had just scalded me, literally and figuratively, for not giving him money, and his wife had made it clear I was nothing more than a burden. The house that had felt like a temporary refuge now felt like a prison. By nightfall, I would be free. The silence in my small room was a stark contrast to the chaos that had just erupted downstairs. My legs still stung, a persistent ache that mirrored the throbbing in my chest. I pulled down my pajama bottoms, wincing as the fabric peeled away from the reddened skin. It wasn't a severe burn, but it was enough to leave a mark, a souvenir of their cruelty. I dabbed at it with a cool, damp cloth, my movements slow and deliberate. No one came to check on me. Not Greg, not Sarah, not even Kyle. The house remained quiet, as if the incident in the kitchen had never happened, as if I hadn't just been scalded and told to leave. It was just another confirmation of what I already knew. I was an inconvenience, a financial burden, and nothing more. The realization hardened something inside me, turning the ache into a steely resolve. I looked around the room, a space that had been crammed with my life for the past 6 months. Boxes filled with books, a small dresser, a rickety nightstand. It wasn't much, but it was all I had left. I pulled my worn, navy blue travel case from the top of the closet. It was an old friend, a sturdy companion that had seen me through countless trips over the years. I hadn't used it in ages, not since before my husband, Robert, passed away. My hands trembled slightly as I unzipped the main compartment. Tucked away beneath a folded scarf, exactly where I'd hidden it months ago, was a thick manila envelope, my emergency stash. I pulled it out, my fingers tracing the familiar outline of its contents. Inside were copies of my IDs, my old insurance cards, and most importantly, my banking information. I'd squirreled it away when I first moved in, a vague sense of unease prompting me to keep it separate from my everyday wallet. A part of me, the part that had always been a cautious librarian, must have known something like this might happen. I opened my small purse, which usually sat on my nightstand. My hand reached inside, searching for the familiar feel of my leather wallet. Nothing. I rummaged through the few items inside, a crumpled tissue, a stray button, an old lipstick. My wallet wasn't there. My heart started to pound, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I checked again, more frantically this time, dumping the contents of the purse onto the bed. Still no wallet. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. My credit cards, my driver's license, my bank debit card. They were all in my wallet. I always kept it close. How could it be missing? I racked my brain, trying to remember the last time I'd seen it. Was it yesterday? The day before? It was all a blur. Then, a memory flickered. Greg, a few weeks ago, asking to borrow my debit card to pick up groceries because he'd forgotten his at home. He'd returned it, or so I thought. Then there was the time he offered to pay for a subscription I wanted, saying it would be simpler if he just put it on his card, and I could give him cash later. And the other times, he'd offered to run errands for me, pick up prescriptions, or pay for things online, always insisting it was easier for him. He always had a reason. My mind raced, connecting the dots that had been invisible to me until now. My dread intensified, a sickening twist in my gut. My wallet wasn't missing. It had been taken. This wasn't about a retirement hostel. This was about control, about money. They hadn't just wanted $5,000. They wanted all of it. My stay here hadn't been about recovery. It had been about them slowly, systematically, siphoning away my independence and my financial security. I gripped the manila envelope, my knuckles white. At least I had this. My original banking information, my account numbers. It was something. I needed to make a call. I pulled out my old flip phone. Yes, a flip phone. I'm old-fashioned. And scrolled through my contacts. Edgar, my old friend, a retired history teacher who had been a rock for me since Robert passed. He was gruff but kind, always ready with a dry comment and a helping hand. I dialed his number, my thumb clumsy on the small buttons. It rang twice. Then Edgar's familiar voice answered. "Marianne, is everything all right? Haven't heard from you in ages." "Edgar," I said, my voice cracking a little. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to sound calm. "No, everything is not all right. I'm leaving. Tonight." There was a pause on the other end. "Leaving? Leaving where? What happened?" "I'll explain later. Can you come get me? I need to get out of here." Another pause, then, "Be there in 20 minutes. Pack light." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. Edgar. He wouldn't ask questions, not yet. He would just come. I hung up the phone, a new sense of purpose solidifying inside me. They might have taken my wallet, but they hadn't taken my spirit. Not yet. I still had my will, and a friend who was willing to help me use it. I zipped up my travel case, a small, resolute smile forming on my lips. It was time to go. Exactly 20 minutes later, just as the last rays of the afternoon sun were painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I heard a quiet knock on my bedroom window. Edgar. He was always punctual. I grabbed my travel case, the manila envelope clutched tightly in my hand, and tiptoed through the silent house. Greg and Sarah were probably holed up in the living room, watching television, completely oblivious to my departure, or perhaps they simply didn't care. I slipped out the back door, closing it as softly as possible. Edgar's old, beat-up sedan was parked at the curb, its engine idling. He got out as I approached, his familiar, kind face etched with concern. He didn't say a word, just took my travel case and put it in the trunk. He opened the passenger door for me, and I slid inside, pulling the door shut with a soft click. As we drove away, the house receding in the rearview mirror, a profound sense of relief washed over me. It was over. I was out. "So," Edgar said, his eyes on the road, "want to tell me what's going on, Marianne?" His voice was calm, reassuring, exactly what I needed. I took a deep breath and recounted the morning's events, the words tumbling out in a rush. Kyle's request, my refusal, the hot oatmeal, Sarah's cruel words. I felt the sting of tears in my eyes as I described the humiliation, the burning on my skin, and the chilling realization about my missing wallet. Edgar listened patiently, his hands firm on the steering wheel. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I had a feeling something was off," he finally said. "You stopped coming to the book club. You haven't been to the library in months. You didn't even show up for the annual pie contest. And you know how much you love pie." A small, sad smile touched my lips. I felt so tired all the time. Greg kept telling me I needed to rest, that I shouldn't exert myself. Sarah would say it was better if I stayed home, out of the way. I paused, the full weight of their manipulation settling over me. I didn't realize how much of my independence had been chipped away, how much they were controlling me. "It happens subtly, doesn't it?" Edgar murmured, "like water wearing down a stone, a little here, a little there, until you don't recognize yourself anymore." His words resonated deeply. He was right. It had been so gradual, so insidious. First, it was about my knee surgery, then about my age, then about how much I needed to rest. Every suggestion, every gentle push to stay home, to let them handle things, had been a step towards stripping me of my autonomy. I had been so focused on recovering, on being a good guest, that I hadn't seen the cage they were building around me. "Where are we going?" I asked, looking out the window as familiar suburban streets gave way to a quieter, tree-lined road. Edgar smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Remember that independent living complex we drove past a few years ago? The one with the lovely gardens and the little fountain? You said you always liked the look of it." My breath caught in my throat. I did remember. It was called Evergreen Place, a modest but charming community for seniors, nestled amongst green lawns and flowering shrubs. I'd always admired its peaceful atmosphere, imagining what it would be like to live somewhere so tranquil. It had felt like a distant dream, something I could never afford or access. But Edgar, I began, I can't possibly afford. Don't worry about that right now, he interrupted gently. I made a few calls. They had an opening for a short-term stay, just a few weeks to get you settled, figure things out. No pressure, no long-term commitment. Think of it as a temporary retreat. My eyes welled up. Edgar, always looking out for me. He was a true friend, a beacon of light in the darkness that had surrounded me for so long. He wasn't just helping me escape. He was helping me reclaim a part of myself I hadn't even realized I'd lost. We pulled into the circular driveway of Evergreen Place. It was even more beautiful than I remembered. A small, bubbling fountain graced the center of a manicured lawn, surrounded by colorful flower beds. Residents sat on benches, chatting, or strolled along the paved pathways. It was a place of peace, of dignity. Thank you, Edgar, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you for everything. He simply patted my hand. That's what friends are for, Marianne. Now let's get you settled. As I stepped out of the car, I felt a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in years. The air was fresh, the scent of blooming flowers hung heavy, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was breathing freely. I was no longer Marianne, the burden. I was Marianne, the woman who was finally taking her life back. My new room at Evergreen Place was small but cozy. A twin bed with a quilted spread, a small dresser, and a window overlooking a patch of vibrant green grass and a towering oak tree. It wasn't the spacious house I'd shared with Robert, but it was mine. No more tiptoeing around, no more feeling like an intruder. I started to unpack, carefully placing my few belongings into the dresser drawers. The travel case seemed surprisingly light, reflecting the small amount of physical baggage I had left. As I organized my clothes, my hand brushed against the pocket of my pajama bottoms, the ones I'd been wearing that morning. I felt for my wallet, a phantom limb search, even though I knew it wasn't there. The reality hit me with renewed force. My wallet was truly gone. All my essential documents, all my credit cards, my driver's license, my social security card. The sinking feeling in my stomach intensified. This wasn't just about missing cash. It was about being cut off completely. I sat on the edge of the bed, the small room suddenly feeling too warm. Flashbacks started to play in my mind, replaying like a terrible movie. Greg, always so helpful, so insistent on managing my bills for simplicity. Mom, it's just easier if I set up direct debit for your utilities, he'd said with a warm smile, taking my bank statements. You don't have to worry about a thing. And I hadn't worried. I'd trusted him. He was my son, after all. He was supposed to protect me. Then there was the time he'd offered to help me set up online banking. It's a hassle for you to go to the branch, Mom, he'd reasoned. I can set it up, and then you can see everything from your computer. I'd hesitated, not being particularly tech-savvy, but he'd insisted, promising to walk me through it. I remembered him sitting at my old laptop, typing away, muttering about passwords and security questions. He'd told me he'd set up a strong password, one I wouldn't have to remember, because he would handle logging in for me whenever I needed to check anything. He said it was for my own good, to prevent me from being scammed online. It all sounded so logical at the time. The pieces clicked into place, forming a horrifying picture. He hadn't just accidentally knocked over the oatmeal. He hadn't just been annoyed by my refusal. This had been a calculated move, a final push to get rid of me now that he couldn't get the $5,000. He'd been systematically stripping me of my financial access, making me dependent on him, making me feel like I couldn't possibly manage my own affairs. He wanted to control everything, and the missing wallet was the ultimate proof. He'd taken it, of course, to ensure I couldn't access any funds, to make me truly helpless. A cold rage, unlike anything I'd ever felt, began to simmer inside me. It wasn't a hot, impulsive anger, but a slow, burning resolve. I wouldn't be helpless. I wouldn't let them win. I rummaged through my travel case again, desperate. My hand finally closed around an old, leather-bound notebook I'd kept for years. It was filled with recipes, gardening tips, and in the very back, tucked away for emergencies, was a small section with all my original banking information, account numbers, and even the phone number for my bank's customer service line. Robert had insisted I keep it updated. Just in case, Marianne, he'd always said. Always be prepared. Thank goodness I had listened to him. I found Edgar in the common room, reading a newspaper. He looked up, his kind eyes softening when he saw me. Everything all right? He asked. No, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. But it will be. I need your help, Edgar. My wallet is gone. I think Greg took it, but I have this. I held up the notebook. He took it, his brow furrowing as he looked at the meticulously written details. Good thinking, Marianne, he said, a note of grim approval in his voice. This changes things. We need to call your bank immediately, report the card stolen, and then we need to talk to someone about elder financial exploitation. The words elder financial exploitation hung in the air, heavy and damning. It sounded so formal, so criminal. But that's what it was, wasn't it? My own son exploiting me. The thought was sickening, but also empowering. Knowing the truth, no matter how ugly, was the first step towards fighting back. Can you help me? I asked, looking at him, a flicker of hope in my eyes. Of course, he said, closing his newspaper and rising to his feet. We'll do this together. We'll start with the bank, then we'll find a financial advocate. There are people who specialize in this. You're not alone, Marianne. His words were a balm to my bruised soul. I wasn't alone. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of power, a sense of agency returning. I would fight for what was mine. The next morning at Edgar's kitchen table, a sea of paper spread out before us. He had a strong, comforting presence as I worked, occasionally refilling my tea or offering a quiet word of encouragement. I had brought the manila envelope, my old notebook, and any other scraps of paper I could find that might be relevant. We were on a mission to build a case. My first call, with Edgar coaching me, had been to my bank. I reported my card stolen and initiated a freeze on my accounts. The customer service representative had been sympathetic, advising me to come in person with ID as soon as possible to formally close the old accounts and open new ones. She also mentioned flagging the activity on my old accounts for suspicious transactions. Now, with my old bank statements in hand, the ones I'd retrieved from the manila envelope, I began to organize everything, every bank statement, every unexplained withdrawal, every online receipt I could recall. I wrote down dates, amounts, and any details I could remember. It was slow, painstaking work, and each entry was like a fresh stab to my heart. There were so many transactions I hadn't noticed, or had simply dismissed as something Greg or Sarah had paid for on my behalf. Recurring payments to online vendors I didn't recognize. Large withdrawals from ATMs in locations I hadn't visited. And then the glaring red flags, several significant transfers to what looked like cryptocurrency platforms. My grandson Kyle's crypto project. It was all there, laid bare in black and white. Edgar was on the phone, setting up an appointment with a financial advocate for elder fraud. He'd found a local organization in Pittsburgh that specialized in helping seniors who had been scammed or exploited. The Advocate, a kind-sounding woman named Ms. Davies, had an opening for us that afternoon. When we met Ms. Davies, her office was welcoming, filled with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. She listened patiently as I recounted my story, her expression one of understanding, not judgment. Edgar chimed in, providing details about my long history of careful financial management, emphasizing how out of character this exploitation was. Mrs. Davies reviewed my meticulously organized papers. She nodded grimly as she looked at the bank statements, circling the suspicious transactions. "Marianne," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "it appears your accounts were indeed misused. These recurring payments to vendors you don't recognize, and especially these transfers to crypto platforms. It's a very common pattern we see in cases of elder financial exploitation, particularly when a family member is involved." She explained that because Greg and Kyle had access to my information, they could easily have set up online accounts, made purchases, and even taken out cash without my direct knowledge or approval. The fact that my wallet was gone, along with my IDs and bank cards, was further damning evidence. "I recommend 2 immediate steps," she advised. "First, you absolutely need to file a legal claim. This constitutes theft and financial exploitation, and you have strong documentation here. The bank will cooperate once a police report is filed." My stomach churned at the thought of involving the police, of pressing charges against my own son. But then I remembered the burning oatmeal, the cruel words, the years of quiet manipulation. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my autonomy. "And second, Ms. Davies continued, to protect your remaining assets and ensure this can't happen again, I strongly advise placing them into a protected trust. This will safeguard your funds, making it impossible for anyone to access them without your explicit consent and legal authorization." A trust. It sounded so official, so final, but it also sounded like security, like peace of mind. "What about my house?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. "The house I own in town. Greg always said it was joint now, that he'd handled the paperwork." Ms. Davies raised an eyebrow. "Is it legally in your name, Marianne, or jointly with Greg?" "It's always been solely in my name," I replied, "since Robert and I bought it." "Then it's still yours," she stated firmly. "Unless you specifically signed a deed transfer, it's yours. He can say it's joint all he wants, but without the legal documentation, it means nothing. I would advise you to contact a real estate agent immediately, get the house appraised, and consider placing it into that trust as well. It will protect it from any further attempts to claim it. The idea of reclaiming my house, of taking back that piece of my life, filled me with a fierce determination. Greg had always acted like the house was already his, that it was just a matter of time before it fully transferred to him. He'd lived there for years, paying what he called rent, but was really just a pittance, never enough to cover the taxes and upkeep. He'd even done some renovations, acting as if he owned the place, always telling me how much he was investing in our property. Now I knew why. He was setting the stage for total control. "I'll do it," I said, my voice strong and clear. "All of it. The police report, the trust, the real estate agent." Edgar squeezed my hand. Ms. Davies smiled. "Good for you, Marianne," she said. "This is the first step in taking back your power." As we left Ms. Davies' office, a profound sense of purpose enveloped me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and I was fighting back. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity, orchestrated largely by Edgar and Ms. Davies. I signed papers, made phone calls, and, with Edgar's patient guidance, learned to navigate the intimidating world of banks and legal documents. Edgar had found a wonderful real estate agent, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda, who understood the sensitive nature of my situation. Without alerting Greg, Brenda began the appraisal process for the house. The trust was also swiftly established, encompassing my remaining funds and, critically, the house. About a month later, the first real ripple reached Greg. A formal letter, discreetly but firmly delivered to his home, stated that the property at his address was under review for listing and was legally held in a trust under my name. The letter was polite, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. It was designed to speak for itself, to let the paper do the talking. My phone rang about an hour after I imagined the letter would have been delivered. It was Greg, his voice a furious roar down the line. "Mom, what is this? What have you done? The house? Listing it? What are you talking about?" His voice was laced with disbelief, then quickly turned to venom. "You can't just do that. We live here. This is our home." I took a deep breath, picturing Ms. Davies' calm demeanor, remembering her advice, remain composed, stick to the facts. "Greg," I said, my voice steady, "the house is legally mine. It has always been legally mine. I've put it into a trust for my protection. It's being appraised for a potential sale." "A potential sale? Are you insane? Where are we supposed to go? Kyle has school here. You can't just kick us out." His tone shifted, desperation creeping in. "Mom, please, don't do this. We need this house. We've put so much work into it. You chose to live there, Greg," I stated, my voice flat, "and the work you put in was for your own benefit, not mine. You always knew the house was in my name. But we had an understanding. You said it would be ours one day. This is betrayal, Mom. After everything we've done for you, taking you in, giving you a place to stay after your surgery." The guilt trip began, a familiar tune that used to disarm me instantly. "You took me in because you wanted to control my finances, Greg," I interrupted, cutting through his rhetoric. "And you took my wallet, my IDs, and siphoned money from my accounts without my permission. That's not help. That's theft." Silence on the other end. A stunned, shocked silence. He hadn't expected me to call him out so directly, so coldly. Then his voice changed again, becoming softer, more manipulative. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. This is all a misunderstanding. We were just trying to help you. And that oatmeal, that was an accident, I swear. You've been manipulated by someone, haven't you? Someone put these ideas in your head." "No one manipulated me, Greg," I said, my voice unwavering. "I saw what you did. I felt the burn. I saw what you took, and I heard what Sarah said. I am simply taking back what is mine." He started to sputter, trying to regain control of the conversation, trying to guilt-trip me further. "How could you do this to your own son? To your grandson? Kyle is devastated, Mom. You're ruining his life." "You ruined your own life, Greg," I said, finally letting a hint of the deep pain I felt creep into my voice. "You only miss me now that I said no." With those words, I ended the call. I didn't wait for his response. I didn't need to hear another lie, another excuse, another attempt at manipulation. My hand trembled slightly as I put the phone down. It had been hard, harder than I'd anticipated, to speak those truths directly to him. But it was done. A few minutes later, Edgar called. "Everything all right, Marianne?" he asked, his voice calm. "I just spoke to Greg," I said, a sigh escaping me. "He's upset. Livid, actually. He tried to guilt me, to blame me, but I told him everything." "Good," Edgar said, his voice firm. "You did the right thing. And don't worry about the legal foundation. It's sound. The trust is already in place. Your assets are protected. He can rage all he wants, but he can't touch them. His words were a comfort, a shield against the residual hurt of Greg's anger. I had spoken my truth, and I had protected myself. The paper had spoken, and I had reinforced its message. The bridge was not just burned, it was dismantled, piece by painful piece. Life at Evergreen Place settled into a comfortable rhythm. I joined the morning walking group, started attending the weekly book club, and even found myself enjoying the occasional bingo night. It was a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of Greg's house, a breath of fresh air in every sense. One afternoon, about a week after my phone call with Greg, I was sitting in the common room reading a novel when I saw a commotion at the front desk. My eyes widened as I recognized the figures, Greg and Kyle. Greg was animated, gesticulating wildly, his face red with anger. Kyle stood beside him, looking awkward and uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the lobby. The receptionist, a calm, silver-haired woman named Eleanor, was politely but firmly speaking to them, her hand raised in a placating gesture. My heart gave a little jolt. They had found me. I felt a surge of fear, a familiar tightening in my chest. But then I remembered Ms. Davies' advice and Edgar's calm reassurance. I was safe here. This was my space now. I stood up slowly, walked to a side room that had a large window overlooking the main entrance. From there, I could watch without being seen. It was like watching a play unfold, a drama I was no longer a part of. Eleanor remained unflappable. I could hear snippets of their conversation, muffled through the glass. Greg was demanding to see me, insisting he was my son, that he had a right to speak to me. Eleanor, with practiced ease, explained the community's strict visitor policy, emphasizing that residents had the right to refuse visits, and that I had explicitly stated I did not wish to see them. Greg grew increasingly agitated, his voice rising in volume. He even tried to push past Eleanor at one point, but she held her ground, her gaze unwavering. Then, two security guards, two kind but very large men, who usually just waved to me in the hallways, appeared from a back room. They were polite but firm. They escorted Greg and Kyle towards the exit, their movements deliberate and non-negotiable. Greg continued to protest, his words echoing impotently in the quiet lobby. Kyle kept his head down, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. I watched them as they were led out, watched them get into Greg's car, watched the car pull away. I didn't move. I didn't confront them. I didn't engage. I just watched them leave. There was no triumph, no gloating, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. Their anger, their desperation couldn't touch me here. I had built a wall, not of anger or resentment, but of boundaries and self-protection. That evening, the aroma of cinnamon and ripe bananas filled the air in the community kitchen. It was banana bread baking night, a tradition at Evergreen Place. I joined the other residents, laughing as we mashed bananas and measured flour. Mrs. Henderson, a delightful woman with a booming laugh and a penchant for storytelling, shared a hilarious anecdote about a baking mishap from her youth. Mr. Peterson, a retired engineer, meticulously measured ingredients, insisting on scientific precision. As the warm, sweet scent of the baking bread enveloped me, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was my home now. These were my people. I was grounded, truly grounded, for the first time in a long time. The drama with Greg and Kyle felt distant, like a bad dream receding into the background. I was building a new life, a life of my own choosing, free from the manipulation and control that had overshadowed my existence for far too long. A few weeks later, a letter arrived for me at Evergreen Place. It wasn't from the bank, or from Ms. Davies, or from Edgar. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Greg's. My heart gave a little flutter, a ghost of the old anxiety, but then I reminded myself of the safe haven I now inhabited. I opened the letter carefully. Inside, tucked neatly, was a personal check. It was for $500, made out to me, with a memo line that read, "Car repairs, sorry." I stared at the check, a cold wave washing over me. Car repairs? My car had been gone for months, sold by Greg when I first moved in, he said, because I wouldn't be driving for a while. And the account it was drawn from. It was one of my old accounts, the ones Ms. Davies had flagged as being compromised, the ones I had since closed and transferred funds from. It was either a forged check or, more likely, a check from an account he thought still had money in it, or perhaps one he had somehow managed to access despite the new trust and new accounts. It was a test, a bait. He was trying to see if I would bite, if I would acknowledge the funds, perhaps unknowingly giving him a foothold back into my financial life, or signaling that I was still vulnerable to his influence. My fingers tightened around the check. The words "sorry" on the memo line felt like a cruel joke. Sorry for what? Scalding me? Stealing my money? Trying to make me homeless? Without another moment of hesitation, I walked over to the small shredder I now kept in my room, a practical gift from Edgar. I fed the check into its hungry maw, watching as it was transformed into a confetti of useless paper. Satisfaction, sharp and clean, bloomed within me. Then I turned my attention to the accompanying letter. It was filled with half apologies, vague expressions of regret, and a heavy dose of self-pity. He wrote about how hard things were for him and Kyle, how much they missed me, how he wished we could just go back to how things were. And of course, hidden amidst the sentimentality was the inevitable ask for money. He needed help with bills. Kyle needed new clothes for school, something about a broken appliance. The usual litany of woes, designed to tug at my heartstrings and open my purse. I read the letter from beginning to end, my expression unmoving. There was no anger now, just a quiet weariness. He hadn't changed. He never would. I folded the letter neatly and, without a second thought, shredded that too. Every last piece. I didn't need to reply. My actions spoke louder than any words. Later that day, when Edgar called to check in, I told him about the letter and the check. "You shredded it?" he asked, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Every last piece," I confirmed, and I'm not going to reply to him. "Good for you, Marianne," he said. "That was bait, pure and simple, and you didn't bite. That's real progress. It shows how far you've come." His words resonated deeply. It wasn't about winning an argument or delivering a scathing rebuke. It was about choosing not to engage, not to fall back into the old patterns. It was about severing the emotional ties that had allowed him to manipulate me for so long. The silence was my most powerful weapon and my strongest boundary. A few days later, Edgar called with more news. "The trust flagged another attempt by Greg to access your old account," he informed me, his voice a low rumble. "Apparently, he tried to set up another recurring payment. The bank's fraud department caught it immediately, thanks to our initial report. They've officially opened a case." A case. The words felt heavy, final. It was no longer just me against Greg. It was the system. The following afternoon, 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit arrived at Evergreen Place. Detective Miller, a serious-looking woman with kind eyes, and her partner, Officer Ramirez, a younger man who took meticulous notes. They sat with me in the common room, speaking softly, professionally, making me feel at ease. I presented them with the binders of documents Edgar and I had painstakingly organized. Bank statements with suspicious transactions highlighted, the dates and times of the alleged ATM withdrawals. my old notebook with all my original account, information, and even a copy of the formal letter Brenda had sent about the house appraisal. My detailed notes, including the dates of my missing wallet and the oatmeal incident, seemed to impress them. Detective Miller nodded as she flipped through the pages. "This is very thorough, Ms. Hayes," she said, using my maiden name, which I had recently started using again as a small act of reclamation. "This level of detail is incredibly helpful in these types of cases." They asked me to recount the events again, from Kyle's request for money to Greg's increasingly controlling behavior to the oatmeal incident, and finally the discovery of my missing wallet and the attempts to access my accounts. I spoke calmly, clearly, stating the facts without embellishment, leaving out the emotional pain and focusing on the actions. When I finished, Detective Miller closed the binder. "Based on the evidence you've provided, Ms. Hayes, and the bank's own flags, we are opening a formal case for elder financial exploitation and potentially forgery. We'll be interviewing your son and grandson, and we'll be seeking to recover your stolen funds." A wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, sadness, a strange sense of vindication. It was happening. Justice, or at least accountability, was within reach. That evening, I found myself drawn to a small, hidden compartment in my old jewelry box, a place where I'd kept a few precious mementos from Robert. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. A letter. I remembered it instantly. Robert had written it for me shortly before he passed away, instructing me not to open it until I felt truly lost, truly alone. I had kept it all these years, tucked away, never daring to read its contents, perhaps out of a fear of facing that kind of despair. Now, as the day wound down and the weight of what was to come settled on me, it felt like the right time. I pulled out the letter, unfolding the brittle paper. Robert's familiar handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Marianne, if you are reading this, then you are probably facing a challenge, a moment when you feel lost and perhaps even alone. Know this, you are never truly alone, and your strength is far greater than you realize. Life throws curveballs, my love. People disappoint us, sometimes even those we hold dearest. But your worth, your light, is not defined by how others treat you. It's defined by how you choose to respond, by the kindness you show yourself, and by the courage you find within. Remember that old saying, don't let anyone dim your light. It's true. If anyone, no matter who they are, tries to diminish you, to control you, to make you feel less than you are, then you have my full permission, my encouragement to walk away. Protect your peace, Marianne. Protect your beautiful, bright spirit. I will always be with you, cheering you on, always. With all my love, Robert. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of profound understanding and gratitude. Robert, even in death, was still looking out for me. His words were a validation of everything I had done, everything I was doing. Walk away from anyone who tries to dim your light. He had known, even then, the capacity for darkness in others and the boundless strength within me. I was finally walking away, finally reclaiming my light. Life at Evergreen Place continued to unfold peacefully. The days were filled with quiet routines, pleasant conversations, and a growing sense of belonging. The legal process with the investigators was moving forward, but I tried not to dwell on it. I had done my part. Now it was in their hands. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat in the meticulously kept garden with my new friend, Clara, a lively woman with a penchant for telling wildly exaggerated stories about her youth, I saw them again, Greg and Kyle. They stood at the main entrance, visible through the large glass doors of the community center. Greg was shouting, his voice muffled by the thick glass, his face contorted in a mask of fury and frustration. Kyle stood beside him, looking even more miserable than before, avoiding eye contact with anyone. It was another public scene, another desperate attempt to engage me, to draw me back into their drama. I felt a